There aren't any real states that have stood out, I think, as being the best across all different categories. There are states that are doing maybe Common Core implementation well, or might be doing some accountability stuff. So Colorado has rural areas, and they have one of the best accountability systems around. Minnesota has some rural areas. They've done some pretty good things with charter schools. So I think you really need to mix and match. Almost set up a consortia of rural states and learn from the best of all of them, and hopefully bring them all to bear in Idaho. Of course, all great principals, all great schools want kids to show up for kindergarten highly prepared, and so I'd never argue against that. But I don't want people to use that as an excuse for low performance overall. Great elementary schools are able to compensate really quite well. So I would say get your elementary schools as high performing as possible at the same time that you're trying to get preschool, early childhood programs up and running, but just don't use the lack of early childhood as an excuse for low fourth grade test scores. That'll just serve as a shield forever. You got to tackle this problem with what you have. The money does not belong to the district. It doesn't belong to the schools we already have. Taxpayers provide money so kids get educated, and charter schools are public schools. They are just a new sector within public education. And if parents are choosing to send their kids to charter schools aren't stealing anything. They're actually the recipient of decisions made by moms and dads about what's in the best interest of their kids. We need to get, I think, out of the mindset of saying that districts must be the default provider of public education, and that high-quality charter schools are a legitimate force within the new public education sphere, and they're not stealing anything. They're just competing and doing a pretty good job in places. I guess I would point the causality arrow in the other direction. I would say that unless you start to show employers that you are serious about getting kids to graduate, they're not going to come here, and you're going to just get in this vicious cycle. If you don't produce college graduates, the only thing that are going to be developed here are blue-collar jobs, and unfortunately the number of jobs that are going to be created that don't require a college degree going to shrink and shrink and shrink. And so if you just don't fight this fight about college readiness and then college achievement, you're going to leave a bunch of Idaho high school graduates without jobs in the future. I would say get dead serious about making sure as many kids graduate as possible. You're going to see that has a profound impact on economic development, the job creation here, and then you're going to build your own supply of jobs for high school and college grads down the road. Always. Always. And it's a cost-benefit analysis from the state's point of view to decide, is the, as they say, the view worth the climb. So it is true, if you wanted to get Race to the Top money, you had to do certain things. Or if you wanted to apply for the early childhood program, you had to do certain things. But especially with Race to the Top, the things the feds were asking states to do were in the best interest of kids, or at least as I view policy reform. Teacher evaluation reform, that's good for kids. High quality standards and assessments, that's good for kids. So in that sense, these strings aren't strings that tie your hands. I view them as strings pulling you to a higher level of performance. And so as a state leader at the time of Race to the Top, I didn't mind that at all. There could be a future administration that advocates for other things, and I would say that's a bridge too far. I'm not willing to do that. What I don't want people to do is just view all federal programs as onerous because there might be these mysterious strings and not get involved, when in fact you can be strategic about saying this program will give us money to do what we want, and the requirements are things that we ought to do anyway, so let's take the plunge. I mean, there is a certain amount of risk tolerance that you have to take. I'm willing to put my state out there. I'm willing to say we're going to compete. And some states don't want to take that risk because it means sometimes falling short. But I think in the case of some of these programs, it's well worth it. Well, the Race to the Top first application scored pretty lowly, and I think maybe because of that, the state decided not to apply again, and for whatever reasons, it's decided not to apply for early learning. I'm sure because good people work for the state, they may have had a strategic decision for doing that. The only problem, though, is if they decided not to apply, and because of that they didn't put together plans to advance the reforms that are necessary. So if they don't have a plan for teacher evaluations or Common Core implementation or for data systems or for addressing kids who are in low performing schools or for building a high quality early childhood program or for technology with the Race to the Top District program, if they viewed it as these two things are linked together. If we don't apply, we don't have to do these things. Then that's a problem. I'm less concerned about the money than I would be about swearing off an opportunity to take these big steps in terms of policy. So I think that's a question for state policy makers. Do we feel confident that we're advancing blended learning and early childhood and teacher effectiveness in the way that we need to? Race to the Top and all these programs were just an encouragement, an enticement to move in the right direction, and a lot of states took the feds up on that offer, and I think they're happy that they did. It's up to Idaho's leaders to decide if they're happy that they didn't. So Paul Hill and I consider him a mentor, and he is one of the most important leaders in our field, and he has been for a generation, at least 20 years on this work. So he and I probably agree on 98 issues out of 100, and the one issue where we have a slight disagreement relates to urban districts and whether we ought to use a portfolio model or something that I advocate for in my book. And this might get too much in the weeds, but his view that districts ought to get out of the business of operating schools and into the business of managing others that run schools, I'm not in favor of, because I think urban districts are so broken they can't operate schools and they can't manage others to do it either. I think it's a better model than we currently have, but it is an improvement from an F to my view, maybe a D if we're lucky. So I think what we need to do is get urban districts out of the business of running schools and authorizing schools and overseeing others running it, and create a true portfolio, not having to be tied up with districts. But having said all that, his vision about separating districts from operation, which is an idea that he came up with through contracting in the early 1990s, has been not formative just for me, but has done more to change what we think of when it comes to what it means to deliver public education than just about anything other than the very first charter school law. So his place in history is unquestioned. Well, you can give your energy in a lot of different ways. In the smallest ways, going to work with schools. You could just give of your time, run for a local school board. You could help start organizations that try to advocate for change or that provide different types of supports. You could work for a foundation that's giving money to the most noble causes. But I think that it just has to stem from this fundamental belief that all kids can learn, and that our public education system is supposed to make sure that we deliver on that promise and not make excuses for any of that. So whether it's the creation of a new organization, working for an existing one, or doing something entrepreneurial, whether it's political or otherwise, lots of different avenues for people to take. But I think the first step is, are you willing to say that things have to change? I'm going to do the things necessary to bring about that change. Once people get over that hurdle, big things can happen. I'm sure, but often change happens not just from a group of people who go to a nice lunch, but from moms and dads and people who are willing to agitate without coming to events like these. And what I found is some of the most exciting education reforms were not planned, they were not orchestrated, they developed organically. And it's hard to know what all the different characteristics, variables, components of that secret sauce that enable that to happen, that enable the ecosystem to support that. I guess we'll see. I mean, I think it really begins with a sense that the current state of play isn't good enough, and that something drastically has to change, and that there are people who believe that they can be the ones to change it, and that they will walk through fire to make sure it happens, whether that means doing the advocacy work or hectoring their state legislators or whatever else it might be. I've met a lot of people here who care deeply, who want to push change, and it's a state that, I mean, with the legislation that was passed, at least the policymakers are allowed to do big, bold things. It's now bringing along the rest of the state, and I think the proof is going to be in the next 6 or 12 months. Do we see a new set of actors taking on a new role and pushing big reforms and getting results. This is the history of education reform. You don't expect it, and then all of a sudden New Orleans becomes the model, or you don't expect it, and then Washington, D.C. has almost 50% of their kids in charters. It can be quiet and sneaky. I guess we just have to see if it materializes here. Here's hoping.